this tutorial, I will not only explain how to draw a rose in a watercolor style, but most importantly, the settings that make the brush look like watercolor. The trick to making a digital drawing get a traditional feel is using a paper texture. For this, you can go on the internet and take any free scan or scan good quality paper yourself. Add this image to your drawing and set a layer on multiply. To avoid doing anything dumb, I always log this layer. Now onto the sketch. When drawing a rose, keep in mind that the flower is made of many different layers of petals, and that each petal on the next layer is not aligned with the layer before. The petals will also, depending on how open the rose is, slightly curl around the edges. Most cartoon roses will have one leaf, but to do it realistically, a rose has a branch with usually 3 leaves on them. While finishing the sketch, I'll start explaining the brush settings. To edit the brush settings, go to the little wrench in the right corner of the Tool Property tab. The brush I used I bought from a very nice artist named Jazza, but I heavily adapted it to suit my needs. I'll explain how. The first settings I mess around with are the ink settings. I lower the opacity to 50% to give the color a watery feel. The second option I screw with is blending mode. I put this one on compare density. This blends the brush strokes together. The third option under ink I mess with is color mixing. I choose the blend option for this project, but I definitely recommend messing around and testing with this particular setting. I then choose perceptual mixing mode instead of standard mixing mode, because it feels closer to real life. Then I up the brightness correction to avoid everything getting very muddy and dark. This brush came with a texture in the texture tab that I did not mess with. If you want a watery brush, I recommend starting with a brush that comes with a watery texture. Other than that, this brush was a dual brush. I removed the dual brush part so that I could add the next option. Watercolor edge is the setting that makes this brush complete. Tick the watercolor box, then adjust the thickness, opacity and darkness to what feels right to you. An extra little tip to erase and still have a watercolor edge. If you want to erase a part of your colored part and want to keep the watercolor edge, don't grab an eraser, but use the same brush with the transparent color. It still adds the edge where you erase a part of the color. Now we can start drawing. First, I put my sketching layer on multiply and lower the opacity. Then I put a base layer of color for the stem and the rosebud on different layers and add a layer mask to both so I stay within the lines. Next up is adding shade. I use the same blue for both the stem and the rosebud, so it ties together. My tendency with shading is using either a blue or a purple to get cold shadows, but this is a stylistic choice. If you prefer a warm shadow, then go for more of a brown, dark brown color. A little trick to add highlights is making it look like you removed some of the water from that area with a brush. To get this effect, you choose the transparent coloring option, but use a 50% opacity, so it seems you were able to remove some of the water and color, but some stayed on the paper. I am adding some blue pencil shading on a different layer set to multiply and some white highlights on the rose itself. For this, just any pencil brush should do the trick. Later on, I'll lower the opacity of the blue pencil layer. To make the image feel more whole, I add a soft overlay color. The layer is once again set on multiply. As a finishing touch, I combine the stem and the flower bud layer and blur the edges where they meet. This way it feels more cohesive and like there is some slight accidental bleeding over of the color. And there you have it, one digital painting that looks like a traditionally drawn rose.